Hello.
Salve, hello.
Ah, salve.
Salve.
Lorenzo mi ha invitato.
Scusa?
Lorenzo mi ha invitato.
Mi fa piacere. Dove sei? Fisicamente.
Adesso sono in Italia, ma ho iniziato un postdoc a
Sei
Manchester questa
riuscita a
settimana.
scappare? Sei riuscita a scappare
Da Toronto.
da Toronto?
Sì.
Mamma.
Adesso appunto non so se Lorenzo ti ha detto che ho iniziato un postdoc a Manchester nel loro gruppo.
Ah,
Sì, sono riuscita a scappare da Toronto.
sì, perché ho degli amici in Canada che dicevano che adesso c'hanno restrizioni, non potevano rientrare in Canada, credo, dove
Il,
erano.
Ca- il Canada è sempre stato molto restrittivo negli ingressi. Adesso hanno aumentato, hanno inserito gli hotel obbligatori.
Beh, speriamo che siano hotel carini almeno.
Speriamo.
Io sono stato solo in Canada da Montreal, credo. O Montreal, dipende come vuoi dirlo. Ma insomma. Vabbè, comunque adesso sei in Italia e ti interessi tantissimo a questi modelli. Beh, se hai frequentato Lorenzo, sfido io, che ti piacciono i modelli epidemici. In questo modo.
Hello.
Hello, good to see you.
Peter?
Hello. Good to see you. I was saying that Lorenzo invited me to participate to the meeting, just to listen. So I've started a postdoc with Lorenzo this week.
Yeah, he announced it.
Right, okay.
Yes.
You were in Helsinki before, right?
I did my PhD in Helsinki, yeah.
Hyvä.
I think we met there once.
I think so. Yeah, either in Helsinki or
Peter is in Stockholm, so he's up north.
in Stockholm, right? I was thinking maybe at the Swedish meeting.
Okay, I thought perhaps I was wrong. I was at a
Or at the school.
mathematical bio event.
Right, today, the day. In Helsinki, right? Yeah.
Eva organized that.
Right.
Good.
Have you kept contact with the Nordic countries, Francesca?
Not much with Nordic countries, actually. Yeah, not much. So when I was in Helsinki, it was much easier to participate also in the Nordic, Helsinki and Sweden. But afterwards from Canada, I lost a bit of contact with the people there.
Yes, it's Nordic by itself, Canada. Oh, don't know. Toronto is not that cold, right?
Toronto is cold, but it's actually Croatia, at the level of Croatia, center Croatia. So it's actually southern than I live now.
Yes, but the whole of Canada is kind of colder.
It's cold, yeah.
So it's continental in a way. Well, our Nordic countries, they have more sea weather, and so they are warmer at the same latitude.
Yeah.
And what's your interest in these models? Any interest or any particular interest in epidemic models? I mean,
you mean for this project or in general?
In general, epidemic.
In general, so in general, mainly I would say from my PhD and tradition is like structure models, so renewal equations and delay differential equations. And then so in Toronto, I was working with COVID, and I particularly worked with these models on the contact tracing, but also some other works related to COVID as it happened to come up, like yeah.
I cannot imagine why so much people is working.
Right.
That's weird.
Yes. Let's see. In the meantime, we have more and more people. Lorenzo is here. Glenn, Ben, good morning. Good day.
Morning. So, yeah, thanks, Francesca, for I incorporated your comments in the.
I
I
think
think you wrote a small section which I literally just copied and pasted into the main document because I thought it was a really great addition.
Oh, so Lorenzo edited it.
Yes. So
I was not sure if it was too much for this paper. I kind of added some thoughts, but then I didn't know if it was more for the modeling paper or if I would. Yeah. So please feel free to discuss if it's not.
Well,
if it's,
I literally looked at it like 10 minutes before this meeting.
yeah, I mean, if it's too long for here, because maybe there's too much detail, it shouldn't be.
We may need to cut back some, but I think it's worth putting in at the moment and just seeing what else we can cut, because I think some sections are quite wordy anyway, so I think we've probably got space.
yeah, so Francesca wrote it and I thought it was great, but both of us were a bit unclear whether it should go into the modeling section or into the interventions.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, apologies for that, but last week we decided to get rid of the intervention section and merge aspects of it in with different other sections.
Sorry, I meant the intervention challenges paper.
Yeah, the paper, right? Okay.
Yeah. So in the end, I thought a potential compromise was to kind of, given that all the paragraphs in the in this paper were kind of relatively short, maybe it would fit more naturally into the other challenges paper. But if you thought it was sensible to put it here, I mean, absolutely, 100%, really. Like whatever you decide. I just thought it was good, so it should go somewhere. But then it's not up to us to decide where it goes. It's obviously,
yeah,
like the distinction between the two papers is obviously a bit delicate, because if you have models that are more complicated than an SIR, typically it's because they are motivated by interventions. So ultimately, it's a bit challenging to decide what.
Yeah, I mean, I think Valerie and Dennis, if they were here, they would say that at some point when all the papers are written, then they might take some decisions about moving things around just to make it more balanced. So I think at the moment they seem happier for things to be expressed in two places and then rather than miss them. So
and I felt what Francesca wrote was a bit more general, and not only kind of focused on some specific technical challenges of mathematical tractability. And it seemed that this paper was slightly more focused on mathematically tractable models that can solve some issues. Maybe agent-based models are already attempting to solve with all the limitations that agent-based models have.
Yeah, I have to say, like, yeah, indeed, I was writing more about the challenges of the intervention, of modeling the intervention itself, not the model. So I agree that maybe it's not the good place.
But at the same time, if you look at the interventions paper, then the bit about contact tracing is quite a lot about behavior and adherence, and why that is compromising the impact of contact tracing rather than the actual challenges of modeling it with a mathematically tractable model, which is one thing that Francesca worked a lot in the past year.
Yeah. So I created a new version just before this meeting, which I think combined your comments, Lorenzo, and also I think Jasmina had added some comments. So
let me see, where is it in the Dropbox?
It's called Combined 2021-03-05.
Yeah, I added some file of references, but not.
Yeah, thanks for that, Peter. I included that as well in the bottom, but I haven't done the referencing properly.
Yeah, no, but I didn't want to. I didn't know in which file it has be changed, so I did it this way. But
yeah, I noticed that.
That's strange. Ah, 0305.
So yeah, I should apologize to everyone because I did promise to do this by middle of the week, but this week's just turned out to be.
Well, I mean, the concept of middle is a bit large.
Yeah, true. Yeah, we still have till Sunday, right? So I mean, the headlines are I removed the intervention section and put elements of that section into 6.1 and, well, what I'm still calling 6.3. I think.
While we were just a moment ago speaking about contact tracing, has anybody tried to synthesize how contact tracing is done in practice? I mean, the different strategies, how far do you go, forward, backward, what time limits do you have, how much effort you put into finding contacts which are not completely specified, or even if they are. I mean, how is contact tracing really done, maybe in various places or according to various strategies? Because I guess that we are dealing mostly with a kind of abstract contact tracing. But if you want to represent a real contact tracing, what do people really do that sit in an office and try to phone around and do things? Or how much can they do or whatever?
So obviously depends on places. In the UK, I only have some superficial idea because it kind of changes all the time. There are a couple of people, that, like one of my PhDs is working heavily on this, and Liz Fearon is involved in the interventions paper. They have a much better grasp of what's actually done in practice. There are obvious weird discrepancies of how things are done in practice compared to what the theoretical optimal would be. In particular, I think in the UK for a long time, I'm not sure whether it's still done like this. For a long time, people would trace people would be asked to quarantine, but it wouldn't be they wouldn't start the next step of tracing until they tested positive, which obviously it's completely silly because it just adds a couple of days delay until the test comes back, which means you can't continue the contact tracing and you're basically not running ahead of the disease. But the thought was that if you don't develop symptoms, you just trace, then there are not enough tests, and it's just too much to actually keep tracing without confirmation that a person is actually a case.
And in addition, it makes the modeling a lot easier. Right? You only have to go one step. That's
no, absolutely. But one of the reasons why contact tracing, Francesca, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but for COVID, the lack of clear symptoms, the fact that if you're asymptomatic you transmit, and the delays intrinsic with this, the fact that you transmit quite a lot before showing symptoms, are one of the reasons why it's very difficult to stop, and one of the reasons why theoretically the contact tracing could do better. But it's also one of the things that was not really like there was not really recognized as a thing that you should or even can do in order to kind of run ahead of the disease.
Is it usually specified in some kinds of strategy whether you should go forward or backward in your contact tracing?
I'll let Francesca answer some of these things because she knows much better than me.
You mean in modeling or in the strategies?
Well, you can start with whatever you choose. And then we could maybe say how modeling should be done to correspond to practice, because I guess that the final issue is to say what would work in practice.
Yeah, so what I was trying to add to the paragraph, but again, I'm not sure if it's for this modeling paper or chapter or for the intervention chapter, was that often, so contact tracing has, I tried to mention that there are some resource constraint, like especially when people have to physically call, that often model cannot or do not incorporate, and also the time issues that some model cannot incorporate. So I think this is very good to mention. Now, right now, there's nothing about forward or backward tracing. But yeah. But indeed, many studies that differentiate between forward and backward tracing are mainly theoretical. I mean, backward tracing is better in theory, but then in practice, you need to, I guess, you need to do much more work to go to trace to go longer back.
And you need to be quick, maybe, to be practical.
Right. So yeah, I'm just mentioned about the resource constraint that shouldn't be ignored.
But that means that maybe we should try to recommend the formulation of some kind of bounds for contact tracing, imagining what would be a max effort contact tracing, what would be a mean effort contact tracing, mean in the sense of minimum. So that theory could say something about what really happens, in the sense that it cannot be better than, but it should not be worse than. And so in practice, this and that, just to reflect reality. I mean, because just saying that this is chasing around in graphs until I found some special condition is not practical.
But isn't it the case as well that in your models you have to be allow for the super spreading events, like what I heard from Ben Cowling of the contact tracing in Hong Kong, is that they basically quite often find the bar, the party, the restaurants where a lot happened. And those kind of events should be part, or those kind of events should be part of the model.
But that's a good idea for disease spread models in general, right? That there should maybe be, because this thing about a place being the place of contagion for several people has maybe been used for agents that communicate other ways, like through water or stuff like that, where several people are contaminated by the same contaminated source, like cholera, which we are not doing right now. But it has not been used very much in infectious diseases. The last time I saw the idea really expressed is in Bailey's old book, where he calls this the Greenwood model, which specifically states that if one person is infected, then everybody is at the same risk in some kind of community. Instead of having this person-to-person probability that then will depend on how many people are around, etc.
Yep, I was about to say exactly this. So in practice, from the practical discussion I was involved in SPI-M, the backwards contact tracing quickly gets blurred with this outbreak investigation or cluster investigation, especially because people, if you go back in the past, they remember less and less who they contacted, and they tend to remember more easily where they have been. So if you know you've been at a party and some people tested positive at that party, then you kind of try to trace everybody who's been at that party. And so it becomes like an outbreak investigation from a practical point of view, rather than a contact tracing model, because you might have met somebody at that party, but not others. But at that point, like, people just say everybody who went to that party should isolate or something. And it's done quite a lot in infectious diseases, despite what Jumpy is saying, is one of the kind of shoe leather epidemiology type of stuff. It's obviously important for non-infectious diseases like contaminated water, but in Public Health England does analyze these things. All of the information about like outbreaks in meat packing plants or in churches, they were kind of of this sort.
But they are not often, they are not dealt with pretty well in mathematical models, I think.
No, I agree with you. The point is that, is it really a contact tracing model, or is it something else? I know one of my postdocs is working with this cluster analysis, more related to universities, really. So it's probably not exactly what you're after, and certainly it's more like analyzing the data rather than having a solid theoretical modeling framework for analyzing that. But it strikes me as a slightly different thing from a contact tracing model. So I agree with Francesca in that sense. Backwards contact tracing is theoretically different from and potentially more valuable, as you said, also because like super spreading people are picked up more often by the contact tracing, and therefore it should be theoretically more efficient. The practicalities of it often make it more, like, not necessarily better. And also, it's not the distinction between contact tracing and backward contact tracing and outbreak analysis, outbreak investigation is very blurred.
But I would agree with Peter that one should also say super spreading events and not necessarily people, in the sense that it might be the fact that all the people are in the same sauna that causes the spread to almost all of them, and not that one was particularly infectious.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I thought you were on the phone, but that's what I said.
No, I stopped.
Yeah. No, so that's the point. Like, it becomes a more an outbreak investigation, an outbreak analysis investigation than a contact tracing problem. They're just they just blur into each other at that point.
Well, but I don't know whether I completely agree whether you can disentangle the two, because what you see in many Asian countries, when you go in a restaurant or to some place, you have to leave your name. So as soon as they know where you've been, yeah, it is an outbreak investigation, but also the people the people who have been there will be contacted, get tested. Probably this works way better in low prevalence settings, but I think it is part of contact tracing, right?
It becomes a matter of what you call what, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, I agree. Like putting your name on a piece of paper and being in the same building as someone else, does that count as a contact with someone else? If yes, then it's a contact tracing model where you've suddenly met like 100 people. Whether you think of it as a part of a contact tracing model, that's up to you on what you define what.
At this thing of inserting then a group of people instead of an individual, which could be done in a branching process, but in some sense jumping one generation, taking the descendants of one and say that's the group. It also involves then explicitly counting the non-infected. So we should have the branching process of contacts as a basis and not the branching process of infecteds. Because there'll be a lot of people who are not infected in that group. And I don't know if you can disregard, well, they would be interesting to count anyway, because they are the cost of contact tracing, that you have to test a lot of non-infected people. So they would have to be counted anyway. But the question if they can be neglected because they lead to various roads that then maybe you can stop after testing and say, no, there was no infection on that branch, but they were around in that group that I had to test because they were in the restaurant. So it changes maybe a little bit the focus of the branching process to the contact process. And the contact process is nasty because you can meet the same person several times, etc.
Yes, I think this idea of clumps is an interesting one. I know very little about it, except I was following Valerie's papers on microparasites. Maybe a follow-up paper. Maybe Valerie wasn't involved in that one, but like clumped, you pick up worms in clumps.
Yeah, it's different things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that's. Well, unless we start picking up lots of different variants, because they were picking up different strains of macroparasite and so on in those things. But
I was just saying I have no idea. Valerie knows a lot better than I do about it.
Can't quite see the relevance at the moment. There might be one, but
I agree. The other thing I looked through the paper. One other thing that I thought was missing a little bit. There was a mentioning of it, but it's about household models, and it's not because I know it was mentioned a couple of times by Dennis. I was wondering whether we need to make more of it, not just because I know about them, it's just that during this pandemic, they have been extremely useful in practice. Thomas and I were really surprised how much these theoretical ideas have really informed part of the response. There was a lot about bubbles. You've all heard about bubbles in the UK. That was all based on households. There was a lot of modeling was asked at the beginning for household-based interventions. So kind of household quarantine, household isolation, studies about what's the impact of kind of keeping, removing infected from houses and put them in hotels, what to do for Christmas, and then an entire stream of using household models to attempt to estimate kind of relative susceptibility, relative infectivity of children versus adults, the impact of transmission in more crowded households compared to other households. There's a lot of stuff on that, in a sense that households data allows you to kind of estimate better the more detailed or more biological parameters than national data streams of kind of time series. So I was wondering, the last bit I said is more about estimation, so I'm not sure whether it would fit in here, but certainly there's quite a lot of, like, the household theory has been used in this pandemic a lot more than I've actually ever seen in practice.
Yeah, I think that would be really useful. I mean, it is mentioned a couple of times here, but we don't really expand on it. So I think it'd be kind of useful to have a paragraph on that, maybe, or a couple of paragraphs, if you had time. And also, I think that I wouldn't worry too much about. I think the estimation angle will be interesting here because I don't think it's possible to cover those kind of details in the estimation paper. So I think the two, estimation and the modeling one, complement each other, and I think it's kind of, in this paper, it's an emphasis on how model structures are useful, both in theoretical terms, in terms of how we understand outbreaks, and interventions, etc., but also in terms of how they allow us to estimate things about the epidemic. So,
but the households are a basic non-homogeneous structure in society.
Yeah.
But they also occur to me, two problems of statistics. One is for contact tracing, namely, wouldn't it be enough to just contact trace the household? How much do you gain by all the effort outside the household? And the second one is, don't households engage in preferential mixing? I guess that the households with children mix with other households with children, etc., etc. So there should be studies on preferential mixing of households as well. And also models, of course, with preferential mixing of households. Well, maybe one should have a type of household that preferentially mixes with a type of household.
So, for what I've seen, the last thing you mentioned is maybe nodded at, but never really done anything about it. Preferential mixing of households. I haven't seen any of that at any point. Mostly, well, there's always this idea: if we reopen schools, how does this kind of create a network of contacts in the population? And it's usually seen as just a network problem. But obviously, one could simplify that network as a kind of assortative household mixing. But I haven't. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge that has not been explored much. In terms of the first thing, I don't remember.
Contact tracing, if it's worth tracing only the household.
So most models of contact tracing don't have households. Martin and Liz, Martin's my PhD and Liz is involved in the interventions paper. They have a model of household-based contact tracing. It's exactly addressing that point. The difference is large because certain, well, could be potentially large depending on lots of things, but the household structure is the natural unit for contact tracing. As soon as someone is detected in a household, the entire household in theory should quarantine and all that sort of stuff. So the contact tracing is naturally household structured, but they have fundamentally a simulation-based model. There is no, I'm not aware of any theoretical household-based model for contact tracing. So that is one of the challenges I would have mentioned in a potential household section.
Yes, because it would be fun to know how much and when you should go further. I mean, if you gain very much by it compared to the effort that Francesca was talking about, I mean, how much work do you put into this contact tracing? How many phone calls and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, Francesca mentioned it in the new paragraph that she wrote last night.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I'm also very aware that there are lots of other people that worked on households, so they might know, they might be more in contact with the theoretical literature than I am. Like I'm happy to scribble down something, but I'm wondering whether someone else that has done households in the past is more willing to kind of chip in. The challenges I would have naturally mentioned if I have to kind of come up with challenges now. One is the household-based contact tracing, basically probably moving from Francesca's section to a household section, stealing the words word by word, really. And the second challenge is most household models assume they're essentially final size models. They assume you have some transmission parameters, and you look at how many people got infected in the household at the end of a within household epidemic or at the end of a longer population size epidemic, and therefore you can neglect all of the complexities related to real-time spread. It's all time integrated quantities, and that's fine as long as you don't have within household policies that depend exactly on whether a case is detected or they don't depend directly on time. And at the same time, if you think about, I don't know, vaccination or any other things that typically is looked at the level of households, the reality of this pandemic and a future pandemic as well is that all of these things one wants to kind of understand, well, run a model as the epidemic is progressing. And I know that Frank Ball has worked on kind of estimating parameters within household parameters from an ongoing epidemic, but there is not much work really on households models throughout time, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. Or when parameters change in time.
My PhD student Carolina is doing some heavy theoretical work on the real-time spread on random intersection graphs, which is basically overlapping households.
No, that's fun if she manages to get something out of it.
But I think the most results will need some translation to real life because it's a lot of existence things. But of course, you have to, if you have those the branching process theory, which Peter Jagers set up for a big part with random characteristics, I think that's more Ole Neerman's work. And
well, you can write most things of interest as integrals over the processes of life or whatever, but then you would have to find out how these processes look, and especially in intersection things.
Yeah,
because you have these infinite chains. I mean, that's what Lorenzo and Frank Ball and others have worked with. In theory, you understand the stuff, but I also believe that there are two different timescales involved.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The process will finish before the other thing has developed. And
no, I agree with that, but it is good to know when how to deal with the dependencies again and those kind of things. Yep. And that's a hard problem, I think. The theoretical work has to be done.
This is all good. We have many challenges then. to put in somewhere. Do we need to write something about all the interesting things we have talked about now?
Perhaps you should write a challenges book.
Would it be better to try solving some of them instead?
Yeah, that might also be, or we just, is any of us at the level of Hilbert to just post them and
Do we have any? I'll look at the participant list again to see if any Hilbert is around. No.
Signed up lately.
Yes. Okay, but so what do we do now? A practical thing for Valerie. Did I understand correctly last time that these meetings will kind of stop, or at least the support of the Institute for these meetings?
The only thing that's actually stopping at the moment is the production of the bulletin, which for various reasons they wanted to stop producing, and we don't really need them because the links are staying the same. And so, and most of the meetings are staying at the same time as well. So we just have to, if things change, we will just need to post things in Slack or send an email around to the relevant people if we wanted to change a meeting time or something. Mm-hmm. But that's the main difference.
So the link remains open, and
the link, everything else to do with the links and the recordings remains the same.
But then we had the wish to finish this paper anyway by March.
Well, that's right. But yes, quite. We do have to come to a halt at some point.
Is March okay? Try to finish it by March.
If we could have a completely finished paper at the end of March, that would be wonderful.
So how far away are we from this miracle? What's the opinion of all the participants? Glenn, you that have been doing a lot of this, looking through the whole paper and polishing it, etc. What do you think? What's needed, especially to say, we have a manuscript or something like that?
Yeah, well, I think some of the sections probably need to be shortened, maybe. Was my feeling, and also because we've got rid of section 6.2, so there's some, and actually, unfortunately, I didn't tell Jasmina, so she rewrote that section, so I need to incorporate her new version. I think we are getting there. I think Lorenzo and Francesca's sort of additions, I think, are very helpful. And I think a household section on household models would go quite nicely and kind of fits with Dennis's, and in particular section on spatial models. I mean, it complements it. It's not. They shouldn't be.
So we will have a new section, or say, called household models or something similar.
Yeah.
If people are happy, I certainly don't want to kind of impose new things.
Models with grouping, or whatever should they be called? I mean, it's a question, because in a sense, this second level household workplace is also interesting, at least to mention that it has to do with the grouping of people. But I don't know what the general name should be.
I mean, I think it'd be useful. To have something about household models explicitly, and then there's Dennis's stuff on the sort of spatial models, and then we can maybe pick up in the discussion. Maybe that gives us one of the themes actually is kind of linking these network, household, and spatial models together.
So this is all within 6.1, isn't it?
Yeah, so at the moment the structure now, we've got 6.1, which is basically modeling and analysis, I guess. And then there's real-time modeling for real-time decision support, using models to inform data collection, and then the policy, using models for policy. So I kind of think the structure is.
Yeah, so I was just trying to clarify in my own mind. So when you're talking about a new section, it's actually a sort of a
subsection of 6.1. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, because I guess that the shortening in general can only be done by 1 or 2 people who collaborate. It's difficult to kind of ask for shortenings to everybody.
So
messy.
Yeah. So I mean, if you guys are happy, I'm happy to continue working on it. I mean, I really only managed to work on it this morning so far, so this week, but I'm free the rest of the day. So
That's an offer we can't refuse.
I was thinking of just having a good go at it, because I kind of feel like I've got a bit of momentum this morning. So, and then either this evening or by Monday, I'll just post a new version that maybe everyone could have a look through, and I might have specific questions for each person to say, can you add references in on this? I mean,
yeah. I mean, if you farmed out various bits to people, if you thought that would help.
Do you want to do this kind of by email? You sit down with a strong cup of coffee, and then you start writing emails. You write this and that. You do this and that, etc.
I think I did say I would do. We did have this conversation last week, and I said I would do it, but because I've not actually got to grips with it until today, I haven't really seen who to ask. But I do now. I mean, yeah, there are some people I will be asking for things, if that's okay. And then I guess, you know, beginning of next week, if people could read it and see whether they think it looks like something like a final version of the paper, that would be good. And maybe also think about other people that we might want to include. I mean, I think Lorenzo, I mean, if I don't know who you had in mind for household models, but
I know Jumpy Peter, really.
Right, okay.
I started suspecting when you said households in the past who had worked with.
Yeah.
Dennis.
All the people.
So we've got everyone we need. Really. I was wondering whether you wanted to include Frank. Or...
No. I was no. There's plenty of expertise here in. I was maybe hoping for them to write that section.
We can work on it, I guess.
Yes. So that would be a rather short section in 6.1 that talks about households, and maybe a little bit more general, these intersection of things, or intersecting groupings, or whatever you can call. And their importance for various applications, because of course, considering that structure has then importance for several aspects of the models, even for contact tracing or whatever. And what about the contact tracing section? Is that more or less full, or would, say, Lorenzo and Francesca want to add something after today's?
So my understanding is that's left up to people to decide whether the paragraphs that Francesca put together are better suited here or in the other challenges paper.
But which one are these paragraphs, more or less? The one that say FS?
So it's the version with 0305 is the latest version, and I included this paragraph. I supplanted the previous one. And
more or less the whole contact tracing section or something.
That's kind of been updated quite substantially.
I have extended mainly what was there, but yeah, not sure if it fits.
Again, Francesca, if you feel that there's things that you'd like to say, that particularly from a sort of modeling point of view, then, or an estimation point of view, then I think it would be, feel free to add some other things in.
Yeah, I actually was not. Okay, so yeah, again, as Lorenzo said, we're waiting for feedback. If you all think this fits here, and also if I was worried that it was already too long, if it's here. So yeah, if you please let us know if you think it's too long or too short, anything. And if I can say another general comment not related to contact tracing, I think the super spreading modeling, I know nothing about modeling super spreading, but maybe that was missing. And from the discussion, maybe that is something that could be important to mention.
Okay, yeah. That's a good point. And I guess generally, if people think there's things that are missing, I guess they probably has had a chance.
Perhaps Jumpy and I should just finish that paper we are working on.
Yes, could be an idea.
Then it's not that much challenge. Well, there are challenges left, of course, but modeling superspreading.
Yes.
Put the entire half paper you have as a footnote.
Yeah, we can do that. We still get that comment on our interface paper, how much we put in the appendix there, which nobody reads. But,
Yes, that's a problem with these new electronical things. That one might write a whole paper somewhere in the appendix.
Yeah.
No, but now reading in detail what is in the contact tracing paragraph, I see that the last part is that talks about resource constraints is essentially things about trying to go back to reality and see. There's also a call for estimating parameters, which has to do with trying to understand what happens in reality. So the points that we were discussing previously are there in some sense, although they are short. And so maybe even the things we have talked about today are already written in that contact tracing section. I don't know what seems.
Yeah, I mean, they could be expand. I think they could potentially.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you like it, I can also just expand or cut.
Well, we like contact tracing mostly because it's one of the things that everybody says has not worked in this pandemic. Although it's an interesting technology, right, to try to do contact tracing, but it has been criticized as not working after a while in most countries that I know of, except maybe the Asian countries, where they have a very extended system of testing 1 million people as soon as you find one case and stuff like that, which is quite strong contact tracing. But in Europe, as far as I know, everybody has said that contact tracing did not work or was not.
I think all the results are about it should be extremely fast and extensive. That is difficult to read.
Yeah. I guess one thing that is missing from here, which maybe I'm not sure it's obviously does touch on modeling to some extent, is the sort of wastewater sampling.
Yeah.
In environmental transmission models, we haven't really thought about that in this at all, and that could be one way to sort of help the tracing problem as well, to sort of identify areas where you think the cases are.
But do we have a section on, say, surveillance, trying to discover if an epidemic is
maybe
starting?
It goes there, yeah.
Because wastewater is presumably interesting, especially for that, because still nobody knows how to quantify the results from wastewater. I've been involved in wastewater, not literally, but theoretically, for control or use of drugs, and people find residues of cocaine and heroin and whatever in the wastewater. But it's an enormous problem to say how many people have then used this drug. I mean, from what you find in the water. That's and the same thing, I guess, with the virus that you say there is a lot of virus here, but.
But I think, for example, I think they used it in the UK to target particular areas. So, you know, you see a particular city has a problem, but then you can actually go to different outlets and test the water there and say that, you know, this area feeds into this pipe, so therefore we should maybe ask people in this area if they wouldn't mind having a test.
This is just a question out of interest, not direct modeling. How is that done and how expensive is it?
Well, it's not dirt cheap, but it's, I mean, the sampling itself isn't too expensive, I believe, but I don't really know. I mean, it's more expensive than statisticians.
I mean, presumably they do a lot of sampling anyway.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, okay.
It's, I don't know. I mean, it might be quite useful for, you know, this business when they're trying to look at the extent of new variants spreading.
Mm-hmm.
So you could,
Yeah.
you know, when you've just got a rather small number of cases in the country.
And then you have a classical other problem. Say, if in London you found that wastewater coming from the pipe of the city is full of virus, then conclude that there is a lot of infection in the city is probably not true, because everybody there lives somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true.
And you have things like that, trying to trace what's the people involved really, if you find this, and especially depending on how you can intervene, of course. You could test everybody in the city and then you would have solved the problem, but there are problems like that, like there was long time ago for HIV. Valerie remembers when you had data from clinics that diagnosed HIV and then saying that the spread happened there or not, because a lot of people were traveling into places where you could test and stuff like that.
Is it more of a challenge for data and or estimation rather than modeling? Is there a kind of a clear modeling challenge on the wastewater, apart from come up with a model?
Yeah, I mean, you just don't see many models with environmental transmission included, I guess, or even shedding. But yeah, maybe at this stage it is more data or estimation.
Yeah,
but we don't have a section on modeling systems, alarm systems for spread or something like that. Because the way we presented this wastewater is not about just an alarm or a qualitative sign of spread, which are about
Section 6.4.
surveillance. 6.4.
Yeah, it's talking about surveillance and pandemic preparedness. So there would be scope to expand on some of that in that section, because I don't think we've touched on. I think, you know, I mentioned specifically conducting experiments in real time, which would include that, but certainly expanding on that to talk about specific issues. I did notice that I think CEH got quite a lot of funding very early in the pandemic to look at wastewater systems as a method for detecting spread, because I remember seeing some BBC articles about it, but I don't know what came of that and whether they've published anything.
So some of my colleagues at BIOS are involved in the sort of Scottish program, so they are using it like as a routine tool now. And I know some people at Roslin who are trying to build into their models, but I think they're finding it harder than they thought.
I was asking the question about the wastewater thing, and not as much for surveillance, but I wonder how to get a completely new view on fighting pandemics is how far you can get with smart toilets.
You mean individually? The toilet lights up in red?
Individually, of course, you don't want it really smart that it's centralized because of privacy things, but how expensive would it be to?
I don't know how far they have pushed the technology for finding virus residues if they're looking for fragments of RNA or DNA in the water, or what they do, because that would be kind of difficult to make. Well, probably they can do everything quick and just a stick that you put in water and see if it turns red. But I don't think they have done it that way, really. For drugs, it's that you have to follow the metabolism of drugs and see what kind of substances are excreted, and then look for exactly them in the water. That's also a thing that up to now requires a lab. I mean, it's not something very quick, but if it was important, I guess they could make it quick, because all these chemical things at the end can become a stick that you just use. If you think about diabetes today, you can very quickly check your blood sugar by these very quick means of measuring. While before you had to leave blood to a laboratory and wait a couple of days. So things can be made quick.
Also, I mean, I guess the cost is relative to the cost of not having these tools as well. So in this, you know, I mean, I'm not, as a challenge, it's maybe something to flag up, that if it was cheap enough, it could be useful. But I think one of the issues with one of the reasons they do it in the sewers is just that you don't have to worry about limits of detection problems so much, because you have lots of people feeding in, and therefore you're not just trying to detect a single case, but a number of cases. So.
No, I guess that at the moment it is a qualitative signal that something is increasing, decreasing, and is present, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem to get the trends reasonably well, but there's a lot of variability on top. They don't really understand it.
Well, I guess it's the same. I don't know if you have mentioned the eternal Google data of various kinds. I mean, as a surveillance tool.
Yeah.
Of course, if a lot of people start asking questions about viruses or aspirin or something like that, that means something. But exactly what it means in terms of incidence is complicated.
Yeah. Hi, Jasmina.
Hi, everyone. I am very late to the party. I'm just looking through this 06 combined with today's date. And I see that there is a lockdowns and social distancing part edit.
Yeah, so I basically owe you an apology, because I didn't inform you, because you left. I think you left early last week, and I didn't tell you that our decision was to amalgamate 6.2, the interventions, into 6.1 in various places.
Okay.
That's what I started to do, but then I've noticed that you've made a whole load of changes, which I haven't included yet, but I will do that.
Yeah. So what the changes, just broadly to tell you what I did, is I put a paragraph on linking what we already had on contact tracing to NPIs, and there is a part there that is needed around evaluating lockdowns and evaluating masks. So I just put them broadly, but I didn't know how much details we want to do that. So there are papers that do this. And then I put a paragraph on vaccination, which I think should be quite small here, because we have the intervention paper, and then potentially we may have a vaccination paper.
Yeah, I think that was a discussion last week, that we didn't necessarily need a separate section on interventions per se, because of these other papers. So
yeah, so I'm happy. So what's agreed to do for next week?
Well, I've agreed to try and tidy it up for the rest of today, and by Monday at least to send round a version for everyone to have a look at. Lorenzo and Francesca are going to add a bit on the contact tracing section.
Okay.
And Lorenzo is going to add a bit on household models, because we felt we didn't have that.
Yeah.
And then and then hopefully by this time next week we can sort of all have an opinion about what else needs to be done to turn it into a paper, or whether it's at the point we can send it to I can't remember who it is now, but whoever offered to review all the.
Yeah.
Is Lorenzo still around? Lorenzo?
Yes.
Would you feel more or less happy if Peter and I kind of collaborate with you to say something about households and strange groupings? During the week, we can write emails to each other or something like that.
I was taking it for granted, really.
Okay.
If we're putting households, should we not be putting something around Ian Hall's work in home care homes as well?
It's a good question. The way I'm understanding this paper is not so much about the challenges involved in understanding disease transmission in small places. Because, for example, I worked also in prisons or cruise ships. There was a lot of kind of parameter estimation from cruise ships. It's more, as far as I understand at least, it's more meant what are the challenges in the kind of theoretical advances on specific types of models. And I thought that households is just a prototype of a enclosed group, really.
I guess given what we said earlier, though, maybe something about heterogeneity. I don't know if you're thinking of covering that, but heterogeneity in household types, where care homes was one type or prisons are one type, might be. It kind of would be useful to link, I guess, to even vaguely to the problems we've had in COVID.
I don't think I've read Ian Hall's work on that, but does he do a kind of malaria model with the staff being mosquitoes and the old people? Or because that we haven't talked about, other ways of modeling disease spread, for instance, by vectors, which could be staph or mosquitoes.
Okay, I'm trying to be pragmatic here as well. Otherwise, I feel like Dennis and Valerie want to kill me because they suggested adding households. I'm just, if you imagine a care home to be like a mosquito model, I don't think it was really done. There was some work from Ian Hall was about the fact that staff are the most likely source of introduction into care homes, and therefore you should test staff. And similar stuff I've done for prisons, and it's just common sense if you see what I mean. From a modeling point of view, you basically have a vector-borne model if you really wanted to, or you have an isolated care home and you just model somehow a risk of introduction through different routes, and you see which one is bigger based on the data you have, and that sort of stuff. I wouldn't think that requires particular theoretical advances in the modeling structure, if you see what I mean.
I don't think people have explored the mixture of the two, that there is a part of direct transmission and a part of vector transmission. At least, I don't know, maybe somebody has written a model where you mix the two, which would be what happens maybe in an old people. So some old people infect each other, but some are infected through transmission from the staff.
But wouldn't that be kind of the same as those models that have both, I don't know, vector transmission and environmental transmission or something like this?
It fits in the framework of what Mick Roberts and Hans Eesterbeek have been doing with their tight reproduction number, right?
Yes, it's a multi-group model with a kind of matrix where you try to calculate the sum of all these transmissions. So it could be done with old-style models, I guess, to represent this thing. Yes, you're right.
Yeah,
old stuff.
There was obviously a risk that I see that as less of a theoretical challenge, just because I haven't really worked with those models. So obviously, just keep me in. Take all of this with a pinch of salt. But I'm just trying to restrict in this paper to theoretical advances of models rather than pick models off the shelf and apply them in a context, because you just interpret a care home as a person and the members of staff as a vector, if you see what I mean. If there is a kind of very clear theoretical challenge there, then I think it should fit here. I just don't know enough to kind of detect that challenge. Well, with households, I've really struggled with households where everything is just final size, throughout an epidemic that is ongoing, those tools were just not, the theoretical tools were just not developed enough to be easily applicable in this pandemic, beyond like simulations and similar stuff, like the discussion about assortativity of households and the household-based contact tracing. Those are challenges where I see some theoretical advances are needed, rather than just moving a different model with a slightly different interpretation and applying it directly. You see what I mean?
No, I think you're right that the vision of the care home in various ways is kind of possible already in existing and old models. The only difference is if you want to make the unions of the care home workers angry or not, how you represent them.
Now, I also want to mention here that, which might be related, years ago I wrote something with Martin Bootsma on the spread of intensive care bacteria and antibiotic resistance there. And that is slightly related, where we looked at real-time spread and found some relationship with queuing theory. In the end, Gianpaolo said, yeah, all mathematics is about finding trivial equivalencies, right?
Yes, a lot at least. A lot.
Is that what you just described, Peter? Is that useful if we think about vaccine escape and drawing a parallel to that, for example?
It might be. So basically what we did was we looked at if something spreads and you stop the spread as soon as there is one diagnosis in the household, then you can use nice results from queuing theory. I don't know whether that's no, that's not vaccine escape. Perhaps
no, it's not. It's not.
You can perhaps use ideas there, but it's more how to use household models where you indeed intervene as soon as there is one detection. So that is how hospital bacteria work as well in the Netherlands, and at least in the Netherlands and the Nordic countries. As soon as you find something, then because it's not that prevalent, then you close down a lot.
Yes, you intervene and start testing others and do things.
But the downside of this model is that we want our households big.
Okay. The other way to think about modeling households and different settings is really just changing the number of contacts, right? Rather than just being a vector, like I agree with what Lorenzo was saying. We can interpret the structure of a model based on the linkages or the parameters within. So you could think of a care home being a setting with a larger number of contacts because the staff is having contacts with more people. They come from outside where they have more contacts. So you could think of it as changing C, or you could solve it as a network model. So, but I don't think that is conceptually changing the modeling setting. It's just applying a different method to answer the question.
I mean, maybe some of these things are, I mean, I guess maybe Lorenzo should, and Gianpi and Peter should write this section as they see, but then maybe some of these issues are things we could pick up in the discussion. I think it would be kind of nice to relate some of the things we talk about in the paper more to some of the, the real world challenges, at least if we feel there's a gap.
And I think it's important because these questions are really sort of current questions. We're writing this now. They might, we want to future-proof them, yes, but we also want to make them current. So as this comes out later this year, we'll be thinking of potentially, you know, what does reality look like, and is it actually reality? And these are the questions we'll be thinking.
It kind of reminds me, Graham Medley, I think, I listened to, was kind of saying that every new pandemic kind of seeks out new heterogeneities in the population and exploits them. And so, you know, that there are some generic things we could say about that. And obviously in this case, it's been very related to age and, you know, the standard kind of mortality profile, but, you know, in other cases it might not be.
Yeah, and you know, the worry is that as potentially another mutant may arrive, may have different characteristics.
Yeah.
And I think this should be one of the conclusions, and is modeling, and maybe we end up with a question where we ask, is the state of art of modeling that we are currently in able to answer that quickly? Or is there going to be a large uncertainty depending on what we assume, again, the caveats of the models?
But the topic itself is more in the paper about emerging diseases in a way, because opening up a new niche in the population is allowing a new pathogen to enter that niche if you're unlucky. So it's about emerging infections or new variants of infection coming back, which are emerging as well.
But I suppose it's also about whether we've got the tools to handle and modeling tools to handle that.
Well, once it has emerged, we have to judge whether it follows an old pattern or not, just a new pathogen.
But to check that, we need modeling, right? Or modeling is one of the tools we need to use to check that. So when the new variant was coming in December, I can tell you that I couldn't calibrate my model without assuming higher transmissibility. It made me think, well, why is that the case? And you know, you when you freeze everything else in the model, when your transmissibility is changing, you're thinking, well, this has something to do with the characteristic of the virus. And what are the characteristics of the virus? Transmissibility and severity. So let's slice through that parameter space, and that's how modelers like the London School paper that was published in Science 2 days ago, and mine, which is under review, found out that the transmission needed to be higher in order to fit this new variant. Yes, I mean, there is still uncertainty around that.
The model used was still an old style person-to-person transmission model, where the number was uncertain for R0 or for whatever. But well, for instance, here we have already proposed that maybe this thing about super spreading should not only be persons but events, and that's already a new style of modeling, or a very old style of modeling, or whatever. But I mean, it was decided very quickly that COVID was a person-to-person disease, and then we have already a big arsenal of models about person-to-person. But we need, of course, parameters and stuff. And in this case, since it became a pandemic, which is kind of new, we have focused much more on modeling the interventions, because that became the main problem, understanding what can we do against the spread, not so much model the spread in itself. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree. And this is where so in a way, there is a sort of almost like the timeline of this pandemic, how it panned out. This is how the discussion we need to pan out, and the tools that we have, don't have, and the challenges associated with it. What did you talk about the discussion part? Is that meant to be quite short?
I would have thought briefly, although I'm looking to Dennis to sort of comment on that. I mean, it will have to be fairly brief if we want to stick to close to the word limit.
So half a page, something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing has just sort of grown in a fairly organic sort of way. So I would have thought there probably is scope for saying most of what we were saying at the moment in fewer words, but
Yeah,
or tightening up. But
I
until,
agree.
until one does that, one doesn't know quite how far it'll go. I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it's if we've really got good stuff to say, and we can, we can't be accused of sort of padding it out, then we can go for a greater length. I mean, I think it's recognised that modelling is the topic absolutely at the sort of heart of the volume. So if it turns out that modelling is a bit longer than most other papers, it's not disaster. But you can, I suppose you could take the attitude, sort of put it in and see if the referees demand that you shorten it. But I think it's we should maybe discuss it again when we've had a little bit more time to see if we can rationalize a bit of what we've got already.
I agree. The other thing I wanted to ask, and this is something I was meant to ask. So obviously, as we are writing this paper, we are reviewing the literature of the existing modeling, and specifically existing modeling of the pandemic. And I'm not aware per se of a paper that is going to review, or group that is working on reviewing what has been published and what is missing from being published in terms of modeling. Do you think an accompanying paper of almost like a systematic review of the modeling to date in COVID-19 is too big a scope to think about as an accompanying piece? And also, is it too early to think about that?
Oh, I would say I don't think it's too early. It might be too big.
Yeah. Well, if we have a strict criteria of published work, then it's not that big. I mean, it's big, but it's not that big. I don't know. Is that something that we can think of doing maybe once we finish this paper as a group?
My impression is that it's a daunting task. I think Helena, my postdoc, at some point estimated a preprint publication doubling time of 2 weeks during the pandemic, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
I agree that if we restrict to published work, like peer-reviewed work, we are going to miss an awful lot, because there's lots of really good work that has come out during this pandemic, but it's in a preprint state because the publication system has gone completely berserk over the pandemic. And also, I suspect many of the things that have been cited in these papers are still in preprint stage, and unavoidably so, because they have been developed for a pandemic, throughout this pandemic, and there's just not enough time to actually get it properly published. It's difficult to kind of polish it enough to submit it if you are in a response mode, and finding reviewers is very difficult, and all of that stuff. So I don't know whether I'm happy if we want to do a review and only focus on peer-reviewed stuff, but I don't think that should prevent us from citing preprints at this stage. And then it's a daunting task. So I see you have a lot of energy, Jasmina.
No, I just, the reason why I'm thinking is because I'm thinking of applying for a small grant proposal that will within it have different streams of work, and I wanted to build on the group that we have here. One stream would be looking at a systematic review. One would be then picking up on the sort of the different streams of modeling vaccination and doing it in one paper with few different models that currently model vaccination. Mm-hmm. Because the overarching question would be, what will happen from September onwards? And I don't know if Jupiter, for example, will do that and would be keen to include other models that are not in Jupiter, or whether that is a separate question. Juniper, I meant.
Yeah. No, I got that. There will unavoidably be an ask of that sort, because certainly, yeah, and it doesn't. So presumably in Juniper we'll do something like that. But like, how whoever can do stuff like that, any effort in that direction is welcome and is very much needed. And also, kind of sorts of models of this type are going to be valuable anyway, and they don't even necessarily need to be kind of particularly rooted in data, because what's going to happen in September, like who knows? Like no one really knows how long the vaccine immunity lasts for, what the impact of seasonality is. So, yeah, there are plenty of things that no one really knows about. So it's not that kind of any sort of access to data is kind of solving directly.
Yeah.
Anybody
So,
who something about it? Good, definitely.
I mean, maybe I have maybe the next thing to do is to share a Google Doc with people here, and if you're interested to be involved as a collaborator or COI or in some capacity. So I think I would be thinking about a 6 months grant starting from September that will look at the will phrase it around the recovery of the pandemic at this moment, but we may not be getting there in September. It's just to think about that, and then we'll take it from there if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. Did I miss anything else?
I don't think so. I think that's, yeah, I think you caught up.
One last question, sorry, that I thought, one last potential comments. I'm not suggesting a new section. I really don't want to kind of expand it in any way, because otherwise I'm a dead man in Dennis' eyes. No, but maybe a passing nod on seasonality might be valuable. Given I mention it now, I think there were some places where it could have been just dropped as a sentence, because some people have worked on seasonality. My expertise is very limited on that, and obviously, again, I'm just talking about modeling development rather than the impact of seasonality on this pandemic or future pandemics and so on. And I know, for example, Nicolas Bakker has worked on this. Peter will know much better than me any kind of proper rigorous mathematical results in that sense.
There is not much, but it's indeed Nicolas Bakker where to look. It's a very, like, even a week. Even making models where there is weekly periodicity is needed.
So this could fit in the modeling part, right?
I'm talking about the modeling challenge, but I don't know exactly where best to put it. I probably wouldn't create an entire new challenge for that. There must be a section where one can sneak a comment about.
As I go through it over the weekend, today and over the weekend, I'll have a think about that. That's useful. So I've kind of got seasonality, super spreading, and environmental transmission as things we've not covered, but we probably just want to mention rather than have sections on.
Probably co-infection, then you also may want to mention there as well.
Good point, yeah.
I don't think there is much, but
you mean co-infection with other
about in future.
With other pathogens?
Yeah.
There was a okay, yeah, fair enough. Sorry, there is always, when we talk about co-infection, there are always two levels, right? There is the within host interaction with multiple strains or multiple pathogens, and there is a multiple co-circulating pathogens at the population level. The within host part, there is quite a lot that Glenn has put in, beautifully so, I might add, and Ben, there was quite a lot in it. The sections were more details than other sections, so they might need to be cut down, but there was quite a lot about within host and multi-scale, which was great. And
I think a lot of that was Jasmina actually.
okay, sorry.
So I mean, I meant more thinking ahead. Sorry, across population. For example, are people? There was a conversation that comorbidities, people with comorbidities, obviously, the discussion is, or the evidence is suggesting people with comorbidities are more at risk. But is this risk, for example, increased more if you have an other underlying infection, or like HIV or something like that, or Hep C, for example? And I know that there are studies. So there is a national study that is going to look at how many people were affected, co-infected with HIV and COVID.
Yeah, no,
but I don't.
Absolutely, fair enough. I think what I wanted to continue on from the comment that there are these two levels is that for fast-moving pandemics, which are typically acute infections, somewhat the within host co-infection aspect is less relevant, because although it is important, because development of kind of variants and some sort of resistance to vaccines and so on, that has to emerge at the within host level. But while in HIV there is an entire, like, extremely complicated system, dynamical system inside the host, because the host is infected for decades. For an acute infection, the impact at the population level is probably more relevant and more easily observable, maybe. In fact, all of the kind of flu models on this are mostly they just make really simplifying assumptions of what happens within the host.
So maybe a point there is around modeling different time scales, as you said, a fast moving. By Peter, I also we are finishing now at 11:30, right?
Yeah,
I thought we were. Are we?
Okay.
Okay.
And
Yeah. So
I'll
maybe
wait,
there is a point to be made there, Glenn, around timelines and different order of magnitude in time of solving these equations. Simply for something like that, modeling around different time scales and order of magnitude.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Good to see you all. Sorry, I've been a little bit sporadic in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think everyone's been really busy generally. So anyway, yeah.
Okay, good to see you all. I'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.